So now we'll briefly give you like an overview how this learning process is done. And again, this is all high level. We'll go into detail as we move on in deep learning. Okay, so these are just basics. Bear with me. Now, the idea is once you have a large scale data set, what you do is you first split that data into some subsets. So usually 3 subsets. The first one is called training subset. So these are your training images, which means that these are the images which you will use to learn those features. All right. And if you are training, let's say a model, which if it's an image classification problem, you can say that that's a classifier. So these images will be used to train this kind of model. Then the second split is you will have validation images. All right. So validation images are once you have trained your model, then you will try to evaluate that model on these validation images. And then you will see, okay, if the performance is not very good, then you will try to fine tune some of the parameters to improve your model. Okay, so that's the motivation. So you won't train on this data, but you can actually take feedback from this data on how well your model is doing. And if it's doing good, you will keep the parameters. If it's doing bad, you will actually try to improve your model. So this is called also fine-tuning your model or fine-tuning your hyperparameters. Again, we will talk about all those things. Don't have to worry about if you don't understand what a hyperparameter is or what model tuning means. So that's perfectly fine. Okay. Now the third set is, this is important. These are testing images. And when you're training your model or when you're trying to learn your features, you will not touch these images at all. Okay, so these are kind of hidden images. And the labels will be secret. And eventually, when you say that, okay, now I have a perfect model, then you will use that model to just test on these images. And that will tell you how good your model is doing. And ideally, what happens is, if these are like, you can say like all the data is 100%, usually you may want to split maybe 60% of the data for training, 20% for validation, or 20% of images for testing. So that's just one way to distribute, but you can have variation. Ideally, you want to keep a lot of samples for training. All right. Now let's try to understand like different learning phases when we are training those models on the training data. So these will be your training images. And you will extract like some kind of features from these images. We'll talk about how to extract those features. Don't worry about that right now. Once you have those features, you will train your model. So that's called model training. And the way you train your model is you need some kind of labels. And that's also called ground truth, which will help you in training your model. So the idea is, let's say you have this image. All right. So you extract the features, you train your model, but right now you don't know how good your model is doing. So for that, you need to know this is an image of Apple. Okay, so that's called image label, and that's also called ground truth. So then what you will do is whatever your network is predicting, you will try to match that with the label or the ground truth, whether you are able to predict Apple or not. All right, so that's why you need labels, and based on how good your model is doing, then you will try to update this network. And once you have finished that process with like the whole data set, you like do a lot of iterations, a lot of rounds of that. And again, don't worry about it. We are going to cover that later in more detail. That's going to give you a trained classifier. All right. So once you have this trained classifier, then you have the testing phase. And right now I'm skipping validation phase. So don't worry about that as well. So we are directly moving to testing phase. During testing, you will take this trained classifier and any image from testing which you have not seen during training. Again, you follow the same process. You extract the features and you take the trained model and use the prediction as your result. Okay, so let's briefly talk about like what these image features are. But whatever these features are, you use the same set of algorithm like both during training as well as testing. So these steps will not change.